When you vote, and when you do it correctly, you expect your vote to be counted. Elections Canada issued a press release today detailing that they discovered over 800 special ballots that were not included in the final count because they were mistakenly left in a writing office in Port Moody, Coquitlam. So what does this mean, and what happens now?
Let's take a look. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the press release that was issued by Elections Canada, and I want to make sure that we mention that because this is part of the transparency process from Elections Canada and their post-election validation process. So they want to make sure that everything's accounted for and that every ballot is located wherever it may be. This is what led to the actual press release.
Issue with some special ballots in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. News release, Gatineau, Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. Earlier today, Elections Canada informed all registered political parties that 822 national special ballots cast by electors from 74 electoral districts across the country had mistakenly been kept at the office of the returning officer for the Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam during the 45th general election. These ballots should have been returned to Elections Canada headquarters by the deadline of April 28th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, in order for them to be legally counted in accordance with the Canada Elections Act. Our initial analysis also revealed that the issue was caused by human error and a failure to comply with the written procedures. The Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perreault, has asked for a complete review of the controls in place to ensure that a similar situation does not happen again in future elections. Quote, "My commitment to candidates, political parties, and Canadians is that when issues related to the delivery of an election arise, we take all necessary steps to resolve them," end quote. And that was from the Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perreault.
Now, this is just a snapshot of the compiled list of all of the ballots that affected all of the affected ridings, but here are essentially, the top 10 or so. So the top number one is, ironically, Port Moody Coquitlam. Next is New Westminster Burnaby, Mallardville, Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge, and the list goes on. So here's the good news, and we have validated this, is that these ballots that were not counted in the final count would not have made a difference in any of the ridings. In many cases, the majority of the ridings that actually had a special ballot that was not sent to the Elections Canada head office was actually just one ballot for the riding in question. Now, the most numerous one in Port Moody Coquitlam, the candidate that had the lead was a Liberal, and they had a 2,000 ballot lead, so these extra ballots wouldn't have made a difference.
Now, that being said, the fact that these particular ballots would not have changed the outcome of the election, to me it's irrelevant, because it's very concerning. When you go to vote, you expect that your ballot is going to be counted, especially when you follow the process properly.
100%.
So this is a huge, huge error. They attributed it to human error, but also it was somebody who was not following the written procedure. This is why we have procedures in place for things like Parliament, and especially for things like elections. If I was one of these electors who had voted in one of these ridings by special ballot, I would be questioning whether or not my ballot was counted. Yeah, you could say maybe it didn't change the outcome of the election, but I think as electors, it's very important for us to know that as long as we follow the rules, our ballot will be counted.
Now, my first question was, well, wait a minute. Why are special ballots for, say, Halifax sitting in an office in Port Moody Coquitlam? That's the first question. And we found the answer. So the reason for this is Canadians will vote by mail from the United States, from UK, from any country they happen to be in, if they know that they're not going to be in Canada during the period of advance polls or the day of the actual election itself. So they will request for a mail-in ballot, and then off it goes. That counts as a special ballot. The other thing that Canadians will do is they'll be around the country and they won't be in their home riding during those periods, so they will mail in ballots from all over the country. So what we've seen here is that there's all these ballots that were cast by people who were located in the riding of Port Moody Coquitlam at the time that they actually cast these ballots. That went to the office of the returning officer in Port Moody Coquitlam, which is what it's supposed to happen. But then the last stage of the journey didn't take place. What they were supposed to do is take all of those ballots and then forward them to Ottawa.
Right. So, for example, maybe I'm a student and I'm out somewhere in BC and I decide to vote by special ballot, and that ends up at the Port Moody Coquitlam office. Now, our riding here is Hamilton East Stony Creek. So when I apply to Elections Canada for my special ballot, I would be voting for Hamilton East Stony Creek because that's my home riding. That's where I live. I'm just out at school. And my ballot would go to the Port Moody Coquitlam office. And that's why you have ballots from all over the country at this particular returning office.
Right. So they weren't even counted. Now, these would be a mix of Conservative, NDP, probably not Green ballots, maybe not even NDP, considering the results of the last election. But this is like the good news. The good news is that the lost ballots did not impact any riding results across Canada. And I'll tell you why it's good news. Because if it did, let's just say that it would have changed the result of Hamilton East Stony Creek, there is no automatic mechanism for those ballots to then suddenly be included to overturn that result.
Right. This is like if you are out of country and you provide a mail-in ballot, but you mail it too late and it doesn't get to the office on time, which is that April 28th, 6 p.m. Eastern cutoff. If you mail it late, it's not counted. And that's the same with these special ballots. Because they were not dealt with appropriately, they were not counted. Again, thankfully, they do not change the outcome of any of the ridings. But as I said previously, when you vote and when you do it correctly, you expect your vote to be counted. This is one of those things that unfortunately is due to human error, because we have a very huge election process and there's a lot of people involved. People make mistakes. Now, I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying this is what happened. And hopefully, Elections Canada will look at this and put more procedures in place to make sure that this never happens again.
Right. Now, let's ask the question. Okay, so let's say this would have impacted the result in Hamilton East Stony Creek. Let's say that the Liberal would have actually won instead of Ned Curick. So what would happen? Well, as we mentioned, there is no automatic change for that. So the Liberal candidate would be out of luck, so to speak, until what's called the challenge period. Let's take a look at that. For that, we need to go to the Elections Canada Act, and there is a specific section in here that is attributed to just that process. This is Part 20, Contested Elections.
Means of contestation. 522(1), the validity of the election of a candidate may not be contested otherwise than in accordance with this part. No effect on rights and obligations. 2, the making of an application to contest an election does not affect any right or obligation of a candidate in that election. Null and void election. 523. The election of a person is null and void if, under Section 65, the person was not eligible to be a candidate. Contestation of election. 524(1). Any elector who is eligible to vote in an electoral district and any candidate in an electoral district may, by application to a competent court, contest the election in that electoral district on the grounds that A, under Section 65 of the elected candidate was not eligible to be a candidate, or B, There were irregularities, fraud, or corrupt or legal practices that affected the results of the election. So I believe this would fall under irregularities if it was found to have possibly changed the outcome of any of those ridings that were affected.
Correct. So this is the whole point of having these processes in place. And I think any reasonable person, any reasonable judge would look at this scenario and say, well, yeah, like this is irregular, number one. Number two, this was a blatant error committed by Elections Canada itself. And number three, and obviously this would have changed the outcome of the election, so you would expect the judge to actually rule in the favor of the candidate. But again, it comes back to these ballots are supposed to be counted. These ballots are supposed to be counted on election night. And you as a registered voter deserve to have that ballot counted. But this is the good thing about these post-validation processes that they actually have and these audits, because they're designed to catch these sort of things. If there's ballots that were supposed to be there, but they were missing, that's how they find these. And odds are there was probably just a box labeled, oh, send to Ottawa, that somebody probably didn't actually take care of. But this is why you need transparency in elections, and it's good for Elections Canada to come out and issue this press release. And I'm betting that they were not very comfortable doing it, but they knew they had to anyway. So they had to issue this press release. They had to notify all of the ridings and all of the candidates in all the ridings saying, we screwed up.
And all the main parties.
Right? We screwed up, but this is the impact that it has on the election or no. And the commitment to the fact that they're going to make sure that new processes are made to make sure that the original processes are actually followed.
Now you might be asking, is this proof that the election was rigged? The answer is no. We do not believe the election was rigged. This is merely a very grave mistake, but this does not prove widespread rigging, if you will. Now let me give you an example. Say you have a hockey game, and rigging the hockey game would make it so that Team A always has to win. Maybe they bribe the referees. Maybe they make it so Team B has horrible food poisoning and has to forfeit the game. Whatever it is, there's no way possible that Team B can win. That's rigging something. This is a very, very grave mistake. It was either the Conservatives or the Liberals that were likely to win. I suppose you could argue that any of the parties could have won. The possibility was always there. And this particular mistake did not affect the outcome of any of the ridings that were involved.
And one of the affected ridings had an actual Conservative leading candidate, right? And another one of the elected ridings had a Liberal leading candidate. So it was a mix of these two. So we don't expect any of these now found ballots to be of any sort of consequence, because it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election in those ridings.
Furthermore, this was not a widespread systemic issue. This was a human error caused by someone not following the process in one returning office in the country, of which there are 343.
And one of the things I just want to quickly touch on is when you're talking process, because this is what I used to, really be involved with in my jobs over the years, is there's something called process controls. So the process itself has an input, an action, and an output. So you cast your ballot, it gets stored, it gets counted, and then that leads to the actual result, right? Simple enough. Well, processes, if they're good processes, they have what are called process controls. And the control, it's intended to actually make sure that that process operates properly, that you can feed something into that process, it runs successfully, and then it actually gets an output like it's supposed to. So one of the controls that are often in processes, especially in complex ones, is post-process audits. That's what Elections Canada is doing right now. That's why they have validating, so they can make sure that the ballots cast were legitimate, the ballots cast were cast properly, and you also have these kind of counts where they're saying, okay, so how many people actually registered to vote? How many people cast a ballot? And how many ballots did we actually get? So all of those have to match up. And if they don't, that's where they go, we need to find what happened to these ballots and from where they were supposed to be. So these controls ensure that our elections are above board, that they are not interfered with, and there's as minimal irregularities as possible. And what we've said this whole time is there's going to be anomalies throughout this election. Case in point.
And Elections Canada will find them and catch them. They just issued a press release regarding this one, but they will be issuing a report after a thorough review of the electoral event or the general election is completed, as they always do after every by-election or general election.